when you get all hot under the collar about, oh my God, how can they change Roald Dahl? Check out Shakespeare. Just that's one instance. Check out Shakespeare and how many times that's been changed and how much money has been made by Shakespeare. So stop. I'm not doing that as a headline. I'm not. Joining me for the headlines that we will do, however, is I love having this guest, Joseph Kotrie-Monson, who's a lawyer and broadcaster and joins me now. Joseph, I'm sorry I had to have a bit of a rant there. Do apologise. But really, do you agree with me, or am I completely out of order?
Do you know what? I think it's really quite interesting because although on the one hand, there are uncomfortable things that you read and stuff, but the idea of zeroing in on kind of ugliness as if it's something that has to be taken out of a novel, well, it would require us to take out half of the ugly characters in Hans Christian Andersen and all of that type of stuff. But as you're right, it only really occurs in a couple of occasions anyway. They're making both things available. And, ultimately parents can choose and teachers can choose either way. Exactly. Is it really that much of a story? And I think that's what you're really talking about.
That is what I'm saying.
Is it really a big point in the culture wars? Is it really something that we have to lose our heads over? Jordan Peterson, who you heard me mention, I think last week, he would say, well, this is only the beginning. Next, we'll be marching down the street, all in lines, in matching uniforms, worshipping our great overlords. That might be a bit of an overreaction to something that's probably not censorship, but just bringing something up to date.
Exactamundo. Talking about being up to date, Prince Charles has decided maybe it might be wise to call off his little meeting. He was planning to host European Commission President Ursula von Leyen. There were fears that would be seen to be interfering with the whole, the Northern Ireland Protocol deal. I mean, when I first read that he was going to do that, I was like, this is a bit close to the actual decision that they're hoping will come down on Monday.
Really interesting, isn't it, Trisha? Of course, it's pretty much been announced already that the deal is done. And just to recap, that's going to involve a new arbitration panel made not just based of EU judges, but of a mix of EU and British judges on kind of Northern Ireland EU law disputes. And the question for Sunak is, will this be enough to get backbenchers to vote for it? And you're right, they've been contemplating wheeling out the big guns in the form of, make sure I get this right, King Charles III. And
King Charles.
Sunak knows that any change to the current position and they lose the support of the DUP, but he'll push on without it. I think it's interesting that they even mentioned bringing in the monarch. And I don't think this was coming directly from Charles himself. I think they're throwing the kitchen sink at this because if they don't get the situation changed, we will lose the Brexit deal anyway. And that's catastrophic for the country. But don't forget, I would urge us all not to forget that the Queen, in her the late Queen, in her typically kind of cryptic and subtle but dissatisfied way, quizzed the Prime Minister at the time, and I can't remember if it was, I think it was Boris Johnson, one of the many Prime Ministers we've had in the last couple of years,
we've had recently,
saying what's this Brexit business, and expressing some dissatisfaction, and it's not the case that the monarch doesn't provide a sense of urgency or importance, in the way that they are offering an opinion. It's just usually subtle, and maybe the plan all along was just, or maybe the goal has been achieved in saying that the king was going to attend. In other words, we should all pay attention to the fact that this has the monarch's approval.
Oh, you don't miss a trick. That's a good, yes, exactly. That's worth thinking about. Different subject. UK shooting lobby to fight demands to tighten shotgun ownership rules. Powerful pro-gun lobbies plan to get hold of ministers' ears, and they really want to mount, they really want to raise ownership barriers after the Plymouth killings. Of course, lots of groups after the Plymouth killings want a tightening up of the rules. they don't, and a lot of the countryside groups have joined in with them.
Yeah. Well, we all know, don't we, Trisha? This comes against the backdrop of the tragic and maybe avoidable killing of 5 people by Jake Davison, 5 of his family members, with a legally owned shotgun. And I have to say,
that was it. It was legally owned.
I've done some refreshing of my legal knowledge on shotgun license laws, and I was surprised, not having visited the Act in a few years, that a shotgun license is perhaps shockingly easy to obtain. A passport photo, fill out a form, payment of less than £100, Trisha, a police interview at your home, a short number of questions, and basically 8 weeks later, you've got a shotgun license. Now, you have to state a good reason.
Is there nothing to do with talking to other family members, or if somebody has had mental health issues or suicidal issues or anything like that? Nothing.
There are provisions for material to be shared with NHS in case there's any health reason, and presumably that includes mental health reasons. And you have to state, get this, a good reason for having one. And that good reason can be work, sport, or leisure. Well, that's basically everything legal that you do while you're awake, isn't it? Now, that legislation goes back to 1968, and while there's been guidance since, the legislation hasn't been changed. I have to say, Trisha, it's hard for me to imagine that there won't be some change in the law in the offing, or some change in practice. And whether that change is legal or practical, I think, is a key question. Now, the quote from the Chief Constable of Devon and Cornwall that's doing the rounds today is that the current law is about permitting gun ownership, not preventing it. Right. Interestingly, nationally, 97% of applications for a gun, for a shotgun, are successful. And Devon and Cornwall is interesting because that's where the Davison killings took place. And there, 6%, double the national average of applications are refused. So there is an argument here, Trisha, that this may be also about police resources, the police who are already stretched, prepared to divert their energy to being more critical in these gun ownership applications. Clearly, it's in their interest in Devon and Cornwall because, you know, heads would roll if there was another attack like this.
Absolutely, and they make and pro-gun lobbyists, shotgun lobbyists, we should say here, are saying that because most politicians are from urban areas, they don't understand the importance of owning a shotgun in a rural area, and they're actually hoping that Rishi Sunak, because he has a rural constituency, will kind of be on their side. And it's worth remembering that the late Duke of Edinburgh was a patron of the group, and now Princess Anne is patron. So they've got some pretty heavy hitters on their side.
It's interesting. I mean, I find it difficult to imagine that there won't be some types of change, and you can be on the side of legal gun ownership and responsible gun ownership, and at the same time say that this legislation is 50 years old. Maybe it's time we looked at it again in the context of modern society. I don't necessarily think the two things are mutually exclusive. Should farmers have shotguns if they want them? Clearly, it's part of the job. Should people be able to do clay pigeon shooting? Yes. Should they be able to have their own guns at home to go and do that? Yeah, perhaps, but let's make sure that there are appropriate checks and probably in the context of the current level of police funding, the police aren't the right people to do it, or they need special funding.
Yeah. Yeah, and we've got to remember that over 50 years, all sorts of things like guns change considerably. When you look at the US laws, and the guns they were talking about then and the guns available now. Apples and pears could be the next UK food shortage. This is what farmers are warning. Growers say they don't get paid enough by supermarkets. Supplies of leeks, kale, all of those things are under threat. And already we've had eggs, we've had tomatoes. it's getting worse and worse and worse.
Yeah, there are two stories here, aren't there, Trisha? And the major one is inflation. This is all about really inflation and consumer spending power. The supermarkets won't pay growers extra for apples and pears, for example, which is the current thing. And we've seen those photos, haven't we, of the local Tesco Expresses with the bare trays of where those products should be. But they won't pay those growers extra for apples and pears because the customer can't pay extra. And that is simply where we are economically. But there are a couple of alarming reasons for those general shortages of all types of products, and they're both sadly predictable. We have weather variations that are affecting the food supply. I think in the case of some of the products we've talked about today, it's cold weather in Spain and North Africa, apparently. But also Brexit means that getting an alternative supply from the EU is trickier than it used to be, because bureaucracy for sellers exporting to here is making it more expensive and time consuming. Now, no matter what your views on Brexit are, the idea of frictionless trade of goods between member states and us post Brexit, at the moment, we can't even do that with the island of Ireland. Yeah. But the idea of frictionless trade, when the whole point of the European Union is for stuff to move within member states quickly and not quickly outside, it was always a bit of a fantasy. And I find it difficult to imagine that this is coincidental.
Yeah, absolutely. Joseph, thank you so much for your time. Joseph Kotrie-Monson, their lawyer and broadcaster. Love having you on the show. We will be back with you in just a moment.